Hi, everyone. Okay, so Vladimir Zworykin, you see the years of his life. So clearly, he actually was a contemporary to many of us. But this is amazing because this man was actually born in the previous century and lived a long life, almost 100 years. But the legacy that he left after himself is just incredible, incomprehensible. And the amazing story about Zworykin is that he came from a small town, a very old one, more than 1 century, more than 1,000 years old, called Murom. And his house is still standing. It's a city museum now. We actually dropped by for we saw some photographs of what the museum looks like. Unfortunately, there is not so much from the Zworykin times. There are no memorial items, so to speak, because just like many other thousands and hundreds of thousands of this family was robbed of their property and the house was nationalized, but we see a monument now. So next to the building is the monument to Zworykin himself. So it's great to know that he is remembered in the town of Murom. This is the Soviet times, especially up until the 70s, 1960s. So basically, up until mention the name of Zworykin because it was not a good idea. It was not safe because he is one of the so-called well, in a way, defectors, because he wasn't really planning to escape the revolution, but it just happened so. Very quickly, I'm going to give a quick recap. So he came from a merchant family. However, they were also an aristocrat, but it was not such a noble family as I would say we know in St. Petersburg, but they were the biggest and the most, I would say, powerful and influential family in Murom. His father owned several businesses, and one of them was actually ferry transportation on the Volga River, but also the grain supplies. We saw a photo of his mother. It was a big family, like a clan, I would say. And well, the boy showed talent for mathematics and physics, and his father thought he would be the best candidate to take over his business when he retired, and he sent him to St. Petersburg because St. Petersburg was the center of everything. It was the capital, and he became a student of the technical institute. All the children in the family got very good education, be it men or women. In this case, the family was, I would say, quite progressive. This is one of the ferries that belonged to the family, and whenever whenever Vatican could, always helped his father, and he was just, in general, I would say, very, very crafty and well, he basically needed to get, as his father thought, less theoretical but more practical knowledge. That's why they thought it would be the best place for him to start institute, where he joined the laboratory research, and this is when he started. And in 1906, he became a student, and by 1911, under the guidance of Boris Rosing, who was the professor of physics, to to successfully test the transmission of images uh, by electricity, right from one building to another. It was just, I would say, a tiny step. And they were not the only one in the world who did that, approximately one at the same time. There were several laboratories that were working on the same thing. And by the way, not there were several scientists who worked on the same thing within the Russian Empire as well. So they were not the only ones, but they were one of the first ones to be successful in that. It was far from uh, being called television because the image was blurry. And basically, it was just a matter of time and the progress because that technology, I would say, was uh, developed ahead of its time. But the First World War got in the way, and then the revolution. So eventually, for 10 years, for over 10 years, Zworykin didn't have a chance to do any of the research work. He found himself amid the civil war, which ignited, which broke out after the First World War, and then the revolution. So the civil wars broke out, and he found himself in Omsk, which was the capital of the White Army movement. The White Army, that means that fought against the Bolsheviks, against the Red Army. They were pro-monarchist, so to speak. Um, I'm just broadly speaking, because there were also some differences within the White Army, but in a nutshell, that's what it was. So Omsk is in Siberia. That happened to be the capital of the Menshevik, of the White Army movement, of the White government. So he started working at the um, kind of the communication center, and he was sent through Arkhangelsk to the States to buy equipment for radio communications, to build up the communications unit. And he traveled back and forth to the States and back. And as he returned, he was made the chief of the laboratory, and then he was sent again to represent, to sort of be some sort of a diplomat representative of the white state, so to speak, in the States. And when he reached the States, he learned that Omsk capitulated, and there was no longer actually a white army, a white state at all, and the Bolsheviks won. So he went to Pittsburgh, to Westinghouse, which was the place where he knew he would be able to continue to resume his research. However, Westinghouse put him in a laboratory that dealt with the design of fax machines, and while working on the design of fax machines, by the way, he contributed significantly to that. He started working on, during his free time. It was kind of a side thing. He continued his experiments in the image transmission, which resulted into, I would say, two different inventions, like the tubes, iconoscope and kinescope, which was not, I would say, welcomed by the Westinghouse. So they completely turned down his idea and didn't want to invest in the television production, in the television development. But David Sarnoff, whom you probably remember, you may have heard of him because he's the managing director of Radio Corporation of America, and he's also the founder of NBC. The NBC we know now is one of the biggest television companies in the States and probably the world. So it was David Sarnoff, who was the immigrant from the Russian Empire. He was a Jew and made an absolutely incredible career. I will definitely be talking about him on my tours of the Russians in the exile in the States, definitely. And you see, NBC, he was there at the footsteps. He's a founder of the NBC and the first director of it. So by 1929, Zworykin, together with Sarnoff, managed to design the very first television set. This is the very first TV, where you actually didn't see the screen. You watched the screen as the reflection on the mirror. So that's the first television. In 10 years, they already, by 1939, they had already, launched the broadcast in the entire country. First, it was just New York, and the signal transmission was done through the antenna on the Empire State Building. And that experiment was quite successful. And eventually they were able, and so this is the video, which is, by the way, included in the interview. On YouTube, you can find like 20-minute long interview. Zworykin and Sarnoff, they're remembering the first days of the television and how they first met. And that's, I would say, a very interesting thing to see and to hear. And well, Westinghouse did not uh, decided not to get involved in the project because it was a very expensive project. As we know from the interview, which the bits of which I showed you, by the way, on one of the previous tours, that Radio Corporation of America had to invest somewhat 90 million dollars to first of all improve the image quality of this well just improve the signal and the quality of the image transmitted because it was yet in 1920s it was still quite blurry, and then they also wanted to sure the television would reach every home. So at New York World's Fair in 1939 they launched the television signal and television on like a full scale across the country. However, it was all live streamed. So the very first television was actually live stream television. I would like to remind you again that there were also other technologies being developed at the same time. And well, the States had one technology. In Europe, in England, they had their own technology and they had to use the wire for it. But many European countries purchased this technology from the States, including the Soviet Union. And Soviet Union was one of the first countries to actually invite Zworykin. And in 1930s, he visited Leningrad and Moscow for the first time. And we spoke about how difficult, how emotionally difficult that was, and how dangerous it was for him. But it wouldn't be the last time he visited the Soviet Union because the Soviets purchased the technology and several employees of the RCA moved to the Soviet Union for several years to oversee the implementation of the technology. Zworykin, in the meantime, uh, became the chief of the laboratory and he continued his research. But because of the Second World War and then the Cold War, all the visits to Russia and all the communication with the Soviet Union had to be put on hold. He was also, as we know now, under surveillance of the CIA and the FBI because of his connections and his past. And because of that, his passport was uh, uh, cancelled, his foreign passport, I mean, and he basically, he was ready. He was kind of getting ready. He was kind of preparing himself for resignation because he felt he had no longer been needed by the country. However, when the Second World War was over, when the Cold War came to an end, things changed, and the kind of to celebrate the end of the Cold War, we know that Khrushchev in 1959 arranged a big American National Exhibition in Moscow, and we know that Nixon was invited, and Richard Nixon visited the Soviet Union and also traveled across the Soviet Union. He visited my hometown, Novosibirsk, by the way. I showed you some photos. And the visits, the business trips to Soviet Union resumed for Zworykin. However, his biggest dream was not even visiting Leningrad, St. Petersburg, right? Not even Moscow. He really, really badly wanted to visit his hometown, Murom, right? The town that is more than 1,000 years old. Actually, it's 1,100 something years old. It's one of the oldest cities in the entire country. So it's a big deal. It's one of the cities in the so-called Golden Ring of Moscow. You may have heard of it. My colleagues Anya and Tanya must have told you about it. So it's just one of those ancient towns that still exist, not far from Moscow, and it actually takes about a week to visit all of them. And they have tons of old churches and very old architecture, but they actually look, I would say they look like very big villages with some absolutely unique buildings that have been preserved. And well, but he could not visit Murom. Well, he wasn't able to visit it before, and definitely after the war, the chances were even slimmer. Because during the Second World War, Murom, being not far from Moscow, became one of the cities where they produced arms and different supplies for the army, uh, because it was not too close to Moscow, but also not too far. So strategically, it was a convenient place to build several factories. And because of that, this city basically closed completely for the foreign visits. And even the Soviet citizens, well, uh, were not admitted, were not allowed to kind of walk on certain streets, even like that. So it was, I would say, it became quite a closed city. Um, and multiple times, so he applied to be allowed to, let's say, give a lecture at a conference in a town not far from Murom, and it was denied. And then in the 60s, in 1963, when, well, then John Kennedy was, was killed, and the burial ceremony was live streamed across many countries, and including the Soviet Union. The it, on the This is the video from YouTube. You can find it colorized, black and white, and the Soviet Union sent well, a representative of the delegation to the funeral, Anastas Mikoyan, who basically represented Khrushchev first and foremost. You see the guy with the mustache right now. He's like the third one in the middle. So this is Anastas Mikoyan. He was a high-rank official. He was an Armenian, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that he was the chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet. So he was at some point kind of the second man in the country, which was definitely the signal of I would say, a so-called thaw in the relationships between the Soviet Union and the U.S. And finally, Zworykin was allowed to visit. Was allowed to visit the Soviet Union. I mean, that was not a problem to visit Moscow or Leningrad, but he was allowed to visit the town of Vladimir, which was like 50 miles, 50-ish miles away from Murom. And that's Zworykin just had to jump on that opportunity. And so he visited. So he came to Murom. He participated at a conference, and then he had some free time in Vladimir. And they arranged for a guided tour, but obviously it's interesting that the profession of a tour guide in the Soviet Union quite often also, I would say, entailed other duties, and also either the necessity to report to KGB, or a guide happened to be also an agent of the KGB. And we're talking about the foreign tourists, obviously, and that was never really just a guide. I would say it was kind of an advanced guide kind of thing. So Zworykin was, by the way, with his wife, his second wife. Last time I told you the story of how they actually happened to be together. So a town of Vladimir, yes, it's just a Russian name. And it's also one of the oldest, most ancient towns in Russia. One of the cities in the Golden Ring. There's also a Silver Ring, by the way. It's smaller, less towns, and a little bit to the side. But well, Vladimir is definitely one of those highlights if you want to see the well, what old Rus kind of looked like. So Vladimir is definitely that type of a city. But obviously, Zworykin didn't want to see Vladimir. So what they did, they basically canceled the tour in the morning, which is a bad thing to do as a tour guide. I feel a bit hurt. And they decided just to wander on their own, to roam around the city. I want you to see a little bit of the old photographs of Vladimir to have an idea. And whenever I can, I jump on the opportunity of showing you the first ever colored photographs, not colorized, but colored photographs of Russia. And I told you that the first photographer that actually came up with a colored photography technique was Sergei Prokudin-Gorsky. And 70% of the entire collection of the first color photographs in the world is now in the Library of Congress. I did a tour about Prokudin-Gorsky. I'm sure you remember. You see, something's wrong with my throat. So these are the first color photographs of Vladimir. Small houses, a lot of wooden buildings, a lot of, two-floored small cottages, and a lot of churches and monasteries, a lot of them. That's basically it, and the beautiful nature. So the Vladimir had a Kremlin, its big cathedral on the hill, and its fortress, and it's still there. So it's an interesting town for sure. And this is from the albums of Zworykin as well, some black and white photography. It's all in the Library of Congress. But there is a website, it's called prokudin-gorsky.com. And this is the big database of the digitized photographs of Zworykin. But also you can find them just on the website of the Library of Congress. So that's easy peasy. It's there. So some old postcards as well. And I thought that it would be great to actually see the town, I would say, from Zworykin's perspective. But it's interesting because I first wanted to see what it looked like at times when then Zworykin was a young gentleman, so before the revolution, and then it would be great to see what Vladimir looked like during the Soviet times as well. And I was able to find on YouTube a Soviet film about the town of Vladimir. It was filmed in the 70s, so it's that trip took place in 1960, mid-1960s, so it's not exactly the same period, but very close. And I just screen recorded it from YouTube, and it's amazing. Honestly, I wish I could watch the entire film, but because I had so many other tours to prepare for, I just had to stop myself. But I'm sure when I have a minute, I'll definitely watch the entire film because it's just an incredible time capsule. And these are just the colored photos of Vladimir, just for you to have an idea. A lot of wooden architecture, super whimsical, and I just had to jump on this opportunity and to share it with you because I normally I don't do tours about other towns, which is a shame because there are a lot of, wonderful places to see and to talk about, but I normally limit myself to St. Petersburg, but maybe I shouldn't. Nevertheless, so I want you to watch a short movie. It's just like a small episode about Vladimir. So it's 1970s. The quality is the best I could find. I've included the subtitles there as well. I hope you can hear it. Let me know if you cannot, but it looks like I got the settings right. And I will explain later on. But check out the vibe. I mean, this is the proper Soviet production.
В 170 километрах от Москвы, на северо-восток от нее, находится Владимир. Обычный город средней величины, живущий заботами огромной страны. Здесь родился и жил писатель-народник Николай Златовратский. Занимался революционной деятельностью один из первых марксистов в России Николай Евграфович Федосеев. Их славные имена как бы осеняют эти улочки, словно сошедшие с картин Саврасова. Сохранять все лучшее, действительно ценное, что пронесла через века история, вот что заботит сегодня архитекторов Владимира. Живая нить истории. Она и в традициях мастерства, и в народном искусстве, и в славных делах наших предков. Она помогает нам по-новому ценить наш сегодняшний день.
So, as you may have noticed from the subtitles that they were mentioned several names. So as we were watching, as we were looking at some old churches in 19th century buildings that clearly belonged to some aristocrats and merchants, there was not a single word mentioned of them because it was the Soviet times and the Soviets basically denounced and canceled, many things. Or whenever they spoke about Romanov, they would not be speaking about Russian aristocracy. They will only be speaking about it in a negative term. It was in negative ways as the discriminators, as the oppressors. So there wasn't a single word about the legacy from those times, but they mentioned who of the Marxists and revolutionaries was born or lived in the town. So that sounds really odd, but that's exactly what they would be doing exactly in the Soviet times. And I wonder what the television of Russia would look like in these years and in the coming years, because it looks like we're just going back, just completely going, just scrolling, spiraling backwards, so to speak. Well, nevertheless, so they wanted to explore the town on their own. They said they didn't want a guided tour. But the thing is that there were also tons of restrictions, and foreign nationals were not allowed to visit the city that they were allowed to visit. They could not leave it. They couldn't leave the city. So there was kind of they couldn't move away from the designated area by more than 30 kilometers. But, well, it's like 15 miles. But Murom was 50 something miles away from Vladimir. But what Zworykin decided to do, he jumps into a taxi with his wife and asks the driver to take him to Murom. The taxi driver just really just kind of his jaw dropped and he's like, it would cost you a fortune, man. And Zworykin gave him a lot of rubles and the taxi took him to Murom. Well, I leave you to that to just, picture what kind of hustle it actually caused in KGB and everywhere, because clearly they lost Zworykin. KGB missed him completely, so they kind of messed up, and now they didn't know where to look for him. Well, I'm sure someone must have figured out where he was going, but it took them some time. So let's talk about Murom a little bit. I told you about the history and everything, but I guess I also would be a good idea to actually see what the city looked like. And we have videos too. Well, this is the videos from the Soviet time. By the way, this is the same Volga River and just a bit more modern transportation. But his father's ferries they would just also sail back and forth on the Volga River just the same way. And they're still the same house. I mean, look at all these houses. These houses clearly remember Zworykin, and they look so lovely. I mean, probably, well, definitely, it's just doesn't feel possible. It doesn't seem possible that anyone could live there. But yeah, there are still people in Russia that live in the houses that are more than a century old, and they're just dilapidating. But that's the sad truth. So, and I found a movie. The movie was filmed in the 80s. I haven't been able to find anything from the 60s or even 70s about Murom, but okay, that's not so bad. So this video I also screen recorded from YouTube, and I'm not ashamed about it. I feel okay just doing that. So and this in the beginning they kind of telling you a bit of a history of Murom. So let's watch and also, if possible, read the subtitles. But I will also explain if you have difficulty catching up with the subtitles.
Первое упоминание о Муроме относится к IX веку, точнее, к 862 году. Первые насельницы в городе Муроме, Мурома, сказано в летописи. Мурома – одно из угро-финских племен, родственных чувашам, мордве и марийцам. Но на рубеже X-XI веков территорию города стали обживать славянские ремесленники. В XII веке муромцы приняли христианство.
So basically, the first mentions of Murom in written documents are dated to the 1800s, and the first settlers were the Ugric tribes. The Slavs, the Slavic tribes, came there in the turn of the 11th century, and in the 12th century, the town converted to Christianity, adopted Christianity.
В XVI-XVII веках особого расцвета достигло искусство. Нет, эти шлемы кольчуга не принадлежали Илье Муромцу, которого современная наука считает вполне реальным человеком.
Ilya Muromets is actually Russian epic tales figure. Ilya Muromets, Ilya from Murom, and he is, well, the symbol of the city. And when I showed you the coat of arms, you saw a man on a horse, so that was the Ilya Muromets, Ilya from Murom.
Вот особо ценная реликвия. Мощи Ильи.
Ilya Muromets was just the actual person. He actually lived, and there was a reliquarium, so the bone box there at an exhibition.
Когда-то Муром был не только старейшим, но и крупным столичным городом. В XII веке он стал столицей Муромо-Рязанского княжества. К сожалению, до нас не дошло ни единой постройки тех времен. Междоусобицы, вражеские нашествия, погромы и пожары сделали свое дело. Один из древнейших памятников – Козьмодемьянская церковь XVI века.
And one of the oldest survivors from those times gone by is the 16th century Cosmodemian church. And so Zworykin reaches Murom, and they visit the house. This is the photo from the archives of Zworykin himself. I found it online. And so they visited the museum. He walked in the museum. He even left a short So this is like a visitor's book, right, where you can leave your reviews, greetings to the museum. It's like just a visitor's book. And this is the visit. So in that visit in 1960s, so from Zworykin, and he signed it. Uh, so he's writing how happy he is to have visited his hometown, and he signed it with his name, and so he says New Jersey. So he left his home address, Soviet Union, oh sorry, the United States of America, Princeton, New Jersey, because that's where Zworykin lived. So you had to leave your address, you had to leave, well, he just decided to leave everything. So just imagine all that. So he walked around his hometown. At some point, obviously, the Soviets, the KGB found out where he was, and it caused such a, I would say, scandal. But because he was a famous figure and he was basically untouchable, so they couldn't do anything to him. They just arranged it so it seemed as an official visit, and in the streets that could like that led to those four very important strategic facilities, right? They were just those streets were blocked, so he wasn't allowed to go there, but he walked down the city. He talked to people. He found several people that were still alive and remembered him. That was absolutely incredible. So, and after that, he was taken to Moscow, and then he left as if nothing had ever happened. So he wasn't told off or anything, but it was, I'm pretty sure that some people in KGB got fired after that. I mean, it must have been. I'm not sure, but it must have been. Anyway, so he returned home. And then remember, in one of the first tours, I told you that Zworykin never stopped dreaming, and he dreamed really big. You know, once he said in one of the early interviews, not even the interview, as if one of the discussions, some scientific disputes, he actually said that television would be able to work even from the moon. Nobody believed him. Westinghouse didn't believe him. One of the biggest, companies that dealt with radio, well, radio signals and everything, and the electric appliances, they didn't believe in it. But he never stopped believing in it. Just imagine all that, and then seeing Armstrong and the moon landing and everything, he watched it from home on his TV, and that was such a powerful moment. Like, absolutely. So no wonder that in the end of the 1960s, he was given a medal, by the president, Lyndon Johnson. So this medal was given for the achievements in science, and it's kind of the Oscar in the world of science, as far as I understand, at least. I don't know much about this award, but I assume it was something really big. It was just the acknowledgement of all the inputs and just all the achievements. So altogether, Vladimir Zworykin actually had about 90 patents, including the patents for the kinescope and iconoscope, which are the absolutely essential elements in every television set. But obviously he wasn't getting younger. This is one of the videos you can find on YouTube, just one of the family videos. So there's a big family, and it was just, I would say, it was almost like an ordinary family, but of an extraordinary person. And I told you that he had a butler, so Lynn. And things started going south when Lynn just collapsed one day, and he just died uh, from a heart attack. And this is when Zworykin kind of realized that he probably wouldn't live forever. And eventually Zworykin passed away quietly. His heart just stopped. Um, However, so there is a grave in New Jersey, in Princeton. There is a grave. You can find him and his wife Catherine. However, his body is actually not buried. he, as an atheist, asked to be cremated, and that's what that was done. And his ashes were spread around the Thornton Lake, where he had his country house. I showed it to you last time, and that was it. But I guess he put all the ticks. But until like he didn't really retire. He continued working at the RCA, and he carried on just working on different technologies, and he never stopped researching. So his inquisitive mind never really retired. So and that was it. So that was the end of it. But the biggest tick for him would actually was that visit to Mura, because it was I guess some of the biggest accomplishments that, for him, in connection with his, homeland. Uh, when he visited Murom, obviously people didn't know much about what about his achievements, but he was remembered by some of the people who, lived in the town, uh, of his age. A lot of people remembered his family and everything. And that film that I showed you from 1980 is about Murom. I want to show you another episode. In 1989, actually, this film was released in 1989. It was filmed in 1989 and released, I think, in 1990 or something like that. So it's almost the end of the Soviet period. However, the film is actually released. It was filmed exactly, on the year of the 100th anniversary since the birth of 1988. This was filmed, and then 89 was released. I think that's just this to be right. So anyway, the film was released to celebrate the 100th year anniversary since the birth of Vladimir Zworykin. And in 1989, in 1988, there was a big, obviously because it was the end of the Soviet Union, the glasnost had already been there. So by that time, everyone in Murom knew who was the biggest hero of Murom after Ilya Muromets. And there was a big celebration in the city. This is when the memorial plaque was placed on the house where his family lived. Later on, the monument would be placed next to the house. It was a big, big celebration. And the American ambassador wanted to participate, because Zworykin was American national, right? It was American citizen. But the ambassador was not allowed to visit the celebrations. But at least there is a film. And I would like to wrap up this 5-episode series on Vladimir Zworykin by showing you an episode, from that movie. From the glorious town of Murom. That's what it says here.
Когда приезжаешь в город более чем с тысячелетней историей, невольно думаешь, что встретит тебя. Какие события, памятники, люди.
Ой, вы гости славные да почтенные, собрались вы здесь, на земле древнемуромской, древнерусской, на родине Владимира Казмича Зворыкина. Позвольте мне, былинному герою Илье Муромцу, поздравить вас и приветствовать вас на нашей древней Муромской земле. И по древнему муромскому обычаю преподнесть вам хлеб да соль.
So as you may have figured out from the captions that this actor is actually the Ilya Muromets, the epic hero, and this girl wearing Russian national costume is offering bread and salt to the guests. This is the old Russian, housewarming tradition or welcoming tradition. This is the big Moscow delegation,
Владимир Казмич Зворыкин, потомок старинного купеческого рода, почетных граждан Мурома.
Явился одним из главных инициаторов и поддерживает здорово празднование.
До недавнего времени его имя было известно разве что среди ученых и специалистов-электронщиков, хотя вклад Зворыкина в мировую сокровищницу знаний велик и неоспорим. В мире его называют отцом современного телевидения, а мы, его соотечественники, присоединились к этому высокому признанию едва ли не в последнюю очередь, поскольку судьба ученого сложилась непросто. Закончив с отличием Петербургский технологический институт, он в начале 1918 года уезжает в Париж, а потом в Америку, где создает передающую трубку иконоскоп, основу современных телевизионных систем. Разносторонне талантливый человек, он имел более 100 патентов и множество научных наград, был членом нескольких академий. И вот, наконец, заслуженное, но, увы, уже после смерти признание земляков. Впрочем, это в духе традиций, и муромских, общенациональных.
It's so interesting the way they are actually, the choice of words is interesting. So they say that, unfortunately, the Vladimir Zworykin was known everywhere in the world as the father of the modern television, but not in Murom, because his life, his life was not an easy one, and they say that he left for Paris after 1918. They don't even say the revolution; they just say 1918. He went to Paris and then to the to the States. So they don't even mention that he fought in the White Army, and none of that was mentioned. This is the very end of the Soviet period, yet they had to be very careful with the wording, and so they say that unfortunately, post-mortem, but the city, the homeland, recognizes, the contribution of Vladimir Zworykin. And the very last lines, they say actually, let me just show it once again, just a little bit of it. So they say that before this end of he is like one of the, I would say, treasures.
И неоспорим.
And his legacy is indisputable. And then the important lines are here.
В мире его называют отцом современного телевидения, а мы, его соотечественники, присоединились к этому высокому признанию едва ли не в последнюю очередь, поскольку судьба ученого сложилась непросто. Закончив с отличием разносторонне талантливый человек, он имел более 100 патентов и множество научных наград, был членом нескольких
And now,
и вот после
not just of Murom, the recognition of the the legacy of the compatriot, is a tradition not of Murom but the entire nation. That's kind of a punchline. So they're kind of leaving us with a very powerful message. Yeah, which was quite unusual, even for the end of the Soviet period. Yet officially, the Union was still there, so it was quite, I would say, quite a punchline. Anyway, this is the end of it. I guess the legacy of Vladimir Zworykin and his contribution to the world of science and everything else is indisputable. Yes, so the chat is open. Let me know if you have any questions. And for those who joined us a little bit after we started, hi. Thank you so much for joining. Let me, if you, while you keep, while you're sending your questions or messages, I'm going to share with you some links where his ashes were scattered over the Thornton Lake, the one that where he had his country house, Thornton Lake. It's not far from New Jersey, not far from Princeton. I'm not sure exactly where it is. But not far. Since he went there every weekend, I assume it was not too far from where he lived. He lived in Princeton. So there's going to be no, I don't color any images. I don't color anything. I don't have time. I don't have budget for it. I don't have the patience for it. I only source it from open source, so from archives. So I don't have any special access to anywhere. So I just use open sources for it. And you can find a lot of colorized photographs on Wikipedia, black and white postcards from the Imperial Times you can find on Wikipedia. And also, as I say, whenever I can, I jump on showing you the photos by Prokuzhin-Gorsky. So there are going to be 2 more tours tonight. In 30 minutes after this tour, I'm taking you to St. Petersburg again, to the Stone Island. And then I'm taking you to Alexandria, Romanov residence, not far from, actually very close to Peterhof by the Gulf of Finland. We're going to explore this neo-Gothic, cozy, family nest from the 19th century. And, there are 3 tours tomorrow, a live walk in Tbilisi, some Art Nouveau, some eclectic buildings, and just an interesting kind of a visit, but it's not actually a visit, but I'm going to show an inclusive footage of one of these very inaccessible buildings in Tbilisi, which I managed to access. And then Misha is going to talk about Russian Shakespeare, Alexander Pushkin. And then I'm taking you to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount for the 3rd time, for the 3rd episode. And a bunch of tours for the next weekend is already up. He's not getting any younger. He wasn't getting any younger. Us too, exactly. That's what watching TV does. Oh, Dorley. Of course, Robert. Yeah, so when we're talking about, I would say, very recent times, many of us, well, I wasn't around back then, but of course, many of us were. Yeah, it was not so recently, right? I mean, it was so recently, it was not so long ago. Yep. Thank you so much, everyone. So this has been recorded.